She wasn't even tall enough to see over the fence post, but Mary Lou Carter didn't mind. She'd gotten used to being small. Small hands, small voice, small space at the table. Folks always said she'd been born too early, too little, and maybe not quite right. Her ma died the same night she came into the world, and her pa never looked her full in the face after that. He remarried quick to a woman with a thick waist and thicker temper, and Mary Lou learned early to keep quiet, keep out of the way, and keep her eyes lowered. The Carter place sat just outside of Rockside, a dry, broken corner of Texas where the wind cut sideways through bones and dreams. The land was cruel in summer and hung cold in winter, and Mary Lou had learned to love the parts of it no one else noticed. The hummingbird nests behind the barn, the lone cottonwood tree by the creek, the way the sun lit up the dirt when it was ready for planting. She didn't have much, but she had that. She was 17 now, though no one would guess it. Folks mistook her for 12 on first glance, maybe 13 with a squint. Her limbs were thin, but not from hunger. She worked hard, ate what she was given, and carried buckets like the rest of them. She just didn't grow. Her stepmother, Lorene, called her midget, or that scrap. Said it like it was a joke, but there was a mean edge under it. The kind that twisted your belly even when you were too used to it to cry. One morning, Mary Lou stood barefoot by the chicken coop, the hem of her patched skirt brushing her ankles. The roosters crowed sharp against the blue dawn. She reached in for eggs, brushing straw off her hands, when she heard the heavy steps of her pa behind her. He cleared his throat. "You're going to live with your aunt in Cross Hollow." She turned, confused. "Aunt Liz." He didn't meet her eyes. "Aunt Mabel. Your ma's cousin. She wrote a skin if you'd come help with house things. She ain't got kids, and her man's old. They'll take care of you." Mary Lou knew better. Aunt Mabel hadn't written. Lorene had whispered in his ear again, said she was useless, too strange to marry off, too much in the way. Mary Lou didn't argue. She just nodded, said she'd pack, and walked back to the lean-to, where she kept her few things. 2 days later, she sat stiff-backed in the back of a wagon headed north. The driver didn't talk much. He'd been paid to take her and not ask questions. Her little carpet bag sat on her lap, filled with what she'd sewn, what she'd been allowed to keep. A scrap of her mother's old scarf. A comb. One worn book with the pages soft at the edges. She didn't cry. Not when the Carter place disappeared behind a curve of hills. Not when the sun dipped low and her toes went cold. Not even when she arrived and realized Aunt Mabel's house wasn't a house at all. It was a half-burnt cabin with a tar roof and no door. Mabel stood on the porch, her arms crossed under her flat chest, eyes narrow. "You're smaller than I figured," she said. Mary Lou said nothing, just stepped down from the wagon and nodded thanks to the driver, who looked at her with something close to pity. "You can sleep in the woodshed," Mabel added, and turned her back. That night, curled on a thin blanket over dirt and sawdust, Mary Lou stared up at the cracks in the shed roof and wondered if maybe she was too small. Too small to take up space. Too small to be remembered. Too small to matter. She kept to herself the next weeks. Chopped kindling, hauled water, mended holes in old coats. Mabel didn't speak unless she was giving orders, and her husband, a thin-lipped man named Jeb, barely seemed to know Mary Lou existed. He sat most days on the porch staring at nothing, a gray film over his eyes like he was looking through time. The days bled into each other. Her back ached from the hard ground at night. Her hands cracked from the cold water. She didn't complain, though. She never had. She thought if she just stayed quiet long enough, maybe she'd vanish altogether. Until the morning the Comanche man showed up. He came walking slow through the pine edge, tall as a tree and built like stone. His name was Tocho. No one introduced him. Mabel just cursed under her breath and went back to stirring beans. Jeb didn't look up, but Mary Lou saw him. She saw the way his eyes took in everything. The way he stood still, not like a man who didn't belong, but like someone who did and was waiting for the rest of the world to realize it. He didn't speak to her, not at first. Just passed by sometimes, a nod here and there, his dark eyes unreadable. The townsfolk kept their distance, said he was trouble, said he didn't belong here any more than a bird belonged in water. But Mary Lou saw something else. One day, while out by the creek bank collecting branches, her foot slipped on the wet stones. She fell hard, her knees slicing open on a sharp rock. Blood pooled fast. She hissed through her teeth, tried to stand, but her leg buckled. Before she could cry out, he was there, silent, sudden. He didn't speak, just crouched, tore a strip from the edge of his own tunic, and tied it tight around her leg. His hands were big but careful. He lifted her like she weighed no more than a feather, carried her back across the stream, and set her down on the dry grass. She stared at him, breathless. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. "You're too small to be alone out here." The words hit her like a stone to the chest. Not because they were cruel, but because they weren't. No one had ever said she was too small in a way that meant you deserved protection. Most people meant it as a reason to leave her behind. But he said it like it mattered. From then on, he started showing up. Sometimes by the creek, sometimes near the shed where she worked. Never spoke more than a few words. But he watched her, not like a man hungry for a girl, but like someone who saw she was real, like someone who knew what it meant to be cast aside. Mabel noticed, of course. One evening, she yanked Mary Lou by the arm and spat. "You stay away from him. Ain't right." Mary Lou pulled free, her heart hammering. "He's kind to me. He's dangerous," Mabel hissed. "Them people don't forget." But Mary Lou did not forget either. Not how Tocho's hands had been steady. Not how his voice had been the first thing in years that didn't make her flinch. Not how, for the first time since her ma died, she wanted to stand up taller. Even if she couldn't. Late one night, she crept out of the shed and followed the trail he always took toward the far side of the hill. Moonlight spilled like silver across the field. She found him there, kneeling beside a set of posts he'd planted, with stacked nearby, a hammer in his belt. "What are you doing?" she asked. He didn't startle, just turned and said quiet, "Building something." "For who?" He looked at her, full in the face. "For you." Her throat closed. He kept working. "You don't belong in that shed. You don't belong under her roof. You deserve something of your own." Tears rose fast, hot, unwelcome. "I'm nothing," she whispered. "I've always been nothing." Tocho stood, came near, not touching but close enough that she felt the heat off his skin. "You're not nothing." They just couldn't see it. And just like that, the air around her shifted. The night didn't feel so cold. The hill didn't feel so high. For the first time, she didn't feel so small. The sound of hammers started early and stayed late. It echoed through the pines like a heartbeat, steady and sure. Mary Lou would sit on the edge of the creek in the mornings with her skirt tucked under her legs, watching Tocho set the logs into place, shaping something from nothing. He worked with purpose. Not rushed, not slow, just right. Each piece of timber was measured, cleaned, and placed like it had always known where it belonged. She'd never seen anything like it. A man building not for himself, but for someone else, quietly, with no promise of reward. She didn't ask why. Not again. He'd said what he meant that first night, and she believed him. And something in her changed because of it. She woke earlier, finished chores faster. She started humming to herself when no one was listening. It wasn't joy, not quite, but it was something close. The thought of having a space that was hers, where no one would raise their voice or slam a door, kept her moving. But things didn't stay quiet for long. The town of Rockside was small but tight-lipped. People noticed things. They saw her bruises, though they never asked about them. They saw Tocho walking past the general store without stopping to tip his hat. They saw Mary Lou sometimes sitting beside him on the far side of the creek, her feet tucked under her and her voice carrying soft in the wind. It didn't matter that they never touched. It didn't matter that she was barely more than a girl, or that he never looked at her with anything but quiet respect. All that mattered was what they chose to believe. At the mercantile, whispers turned quick and mean. Mrs. Halperin, who sold ribbon and canned peaches, told her with a tight smile, "You should be careful who you let build you things, Mary Lou. People will start thinking you're owed more than you are. Reverend Ellis, a man with silver hair and dark eyes that had once seemed kind, pulled her aside after Sunday service. That man has a past, child. You need to think on what kind of future you want. Not everyone's past stays buried. Mary Lou just nodded. She'd been nodding all her life. But inside, she didn't bend this time. She just carried the canned milk and flour back to the edge of the woods and said nothing of the words folks threw at her like rocks. At the cabin site, things were different. Tocho had started adding a porch, just a slanted roof and 4 thick beams, but it made the whole structure look real, like a place someone could actually live, not just hide in. She ran her fingers over the smooth, sanded wood and asked, "How do you know how to do all this?" He hesitated before answering. "My uncle taught me. We used to build homes for families moving west, people who paid in corn or blankets. Sometimes they didn't last the first winter. Did you have a home?" "Once." She looked at him then, long and quiet. "What happened?" "They burned it. So we built too close. So we didn't ask." Mary Lou's breath caught. "You mean white folks?" He nodded, eyes unreadable. It was a long time ago, but she knew it wasn't long enough. Not if the memory still lived in his voice. A few days later, a new voice arrived at the Carter place, or rather, came back. Jed Carter, Mary Lou's older half-brother, rode up on a dust-covered horse with a rifle slung across his back. He hadn't been seen in Rockside for almost a year, not since he'd run off to Arizona, chasing rumors of gold and easy money. He was Lorraine's boy through and through, broad-shouldered, wide-jawed, always angry about something. He didn't say much when he arrived, just tossed his saddlebag onto the porch and glared at Mary Lou like she was a roach on the wall. "You still here?" he muttered. She nodded. "I'm helping Aunt Mabel now." He snorted. "Helping, huh? That what you call sneaking off with that savage every other night?" The words hit her like a slap. Not because they surprised her. Jed had always talked like that. But because he'd said it loud, where Mabel and Jeb could hear. Mabel looked up from the pot. She was scrubbing and smirked. "Told you she was trouble." Mary Lou stepped back, her heart racing. He's not. He's not like that." Jed stepped forward, his face red and sweating from the ride. "They're all like that. You don't even know what he's done. You think he just appeared out of nowhere, building you a house like he's some storybook hero." "He's kind," she said, her voice rising for once. Jed scoffed. "He's dangerous. That man's got blood on his hands. You won't end up in the ground next to the last fool girl he sweet-talked." There was no other girl. Mary Lou knew it deep in her bones. But that didn't matter. Not to Jed, not to the others. The next time she saw Tocho, her hands were shaking. She told him what Jed said, what the others were starting to whisper louder now. He didn't flinch. He just looked at her and said, "Do you believe him?" She shook her head, fast and sure. "I believe you." That night, Jed followed her. She didn't know it, but he'd been trailing her for days, waiting to see where she went, what she did. He found her kneeling by the river, her face turned toward the stars. And when he stepped into the clearing and saw Tocho standing there beside her, a shadow against the moonlit trees, Jed raised the rifle. Tocho didn't move, didn't blink, just looked at Jed like he'd already seen this moment before. "What are you planning?" Jed barked. "You think you can take her, make some little shack, and pretend you belong? She's white. You don't get to touch what's not yours." Mary Lou stood fast, put herself between them. "I'm not yours either," she said to Jed, her voice louder than she'd ever dared. "You don't own me, and he hasn't done anything wrong." Jed's face twisted. "He breeds wrong." Tocho's voice came, calm but firm. "I won't fight you, boy, but I won't run either." Jed spat in the dirt. Coward, but he didn't shoot. Not yet. He wasn't brave enough for that without a crowd to cheer him on. Instead, he stormed off, muttering something about sheriff visits and warnings. Mary Lou looked up at Tocho then, her breath catching in her chest. "They won't stop." "I know," he said. "Are you going to leave?" He looked at her like she was the only solid thing in a world that kept changing. "No, not unless you want me to." She didn't say anything, just reached out and touched the edge of his hand. 2 days later, the sheriff came. Not with handcuffs, but with questions. He rode slow, not like a man on a mission, more like someone just following orders. Sheriff Tolman was a fair man most days, but fair didn't always mean brave. He tipped his hat to Mabel, nodded to Jed, then turned toward Tocho, who stood near the porch with his arms folded. "Heard you've been working on a structure," Tolman said, not unkindly. Tocho nodded once. "For her, not on her land, not your concern." Tolman's eyes slid toward Mary Lou. "You sure you want this, miss?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." The sheriff chewed his lip. "Folks are stirred up. Don't like it when lines get crossed." Tocho said nothing. The sheriff sighed. "Ain't illegal, but it sure ain't popular." Mary Lou stepped forward, chin lifted. "He saved me, and he gave me more than anyone else in this town ever did." Tolman studied them for a long time before nodding. "Keep to yourselves. Stay clear of trouble." But they all knew that trouble didn't always come with a badge or a warning. Sometimes it came in the night. Sometimes it wore your brother's face. After the sheriff left, Tocho pulled her aside. "If you want me to stop building, I will." She shook her head. "No, you're the only one who ever built anything for me." The cabin neared completion. The walls were up. The roof was sealed. The porch looked out over the trees, and Mary Lou sometimes imagined sitting there with a cup of tea, watching the morning rise. It still seemed like a dream, something borrowed, but it was hers. Mabel, meanwhile, grew sharper. Her words lost what little softness they'd ever had. She started assigning Mary Lou extra work, cleaning floors she just cleaned, fetching water from the well even when her legs ached. Jed never went far. He drank more, cursed louder. And at night, Mary Lou started sleeping with a knife tucked under her pillow, not because she feared Tocho, but because she feared what her own kin might do. Each evening, Tocho added another piece to the cabin, and each evening, Mary Lou stood a little taller. But the storm was coming. They both felt it, and neither one of them would turn away. The days turned warmer as spring settled in, bringing with it the soft sound of wind through budding branches and the first signs of green pushing up through dead earth. Mary Lou started waking up before the rooster crowed, her body moving without command, drawn to the unfinished cabin like a tether was tied between her chest and the front porch. The place had walls now, a real door. 2 glass panes he'd traded for in town were set into the front so the light could spill in. It was nothing like the cold woodshed or the Carter house or Aunt Mabel's sour kitchen. It smelled of cedar, fresh dust, and something new. Tocho was already there most mornings, chopping wood or smoothing out floorboards, his quiet presence so familiar now that she didn't startle when she came up behind him. She would sit nearby, not say much at first. Sometimes she brought him biscuits she'd hidden away. Sometimes she just watched the way his hands worked, slow and sure. There was something about the way he focused, fully present, never wasting motion, that made her feel safe. Like even if the world outside tried to pull her back, this place would hold. One morning, she brought a jar of honey she'd bartered from the grocer's wife using one of her few good sewing needles. Tocho looked at it like it was something sacred. He dipped a finger in and tasted it, his face unreadable, then handed the jar to her. "Too sweet," he said, but not unkindly. She laughed, actually laughed, and it surprised them both. "That's the point," she said. "Some things are just meant to taste good." He gave her a look that lingered, then nodded. "Then it's good." Little things like that began to grow between them. He taught her how to tie knots that would hold a roof steady in high winds. She taught him a song her mother had once hummed while folding sheets. He carved a bird into one of the porch posts, its wings open, ready to fly, and told her it reminded him of her voice. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just smiled, but her chest stayed warm the rest of the day. Mabel's eyes grew sharper by the hour. Mary Lou could feel the weight of them any time she returned from the hill. "Don't think I don't know what's going on up there," she muttered one night, shoving a pot in her hands. "You keep yourself pure, girl, or you'll regret it." Mary Lou scrubbed the pot clean without a word. What she wanted, what she deserved, was no one's business but hers. And Tocho hadn't once tried to claim her. He never touched her unless she reached first. Never made promises he couldn't keep. But the way he looked at her, it was enough. It made her feel seen. Like maybe her size, her silence, her strange loneliness weren't flaws, just parts of her no one else had tried to understand. One night, a thunderstorm rolled in, sharp and sudden, shaking the earth like hooves on a chase. Mary Lou lay in the woodshed staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder. When the roof started leaking, thick drops soaking her thin blanket, she didn't think. She just ran, barefoot, through mud and wet grass, her braids slapping against her back. Tocho opened the cabin door before she even knocked. He stepped aside, wordless, as if he'd been waiting. She stood there dripping, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. I didn't know where else to go. You're home, he said, and that was it. He lit the fire and handed her a dry towel. No questions, no judgment, just quiet understanding. She sat by the fire, her knees tucked under her chin, and watched him as he added another log. The rain drummed hard against the roof, but inside was warm. Safe. A space not owned by anyone else. Just them. Why do you do all this? She asked after a while. For me? He didn't answer right away. Then, because you don't ask to be rescued. You just survive. And I know what that feels like. She turned her head toward him, saw the flicker of pain behind his calm. I was taken once, he said. Not by soldiers. By settlers. I was maybe 10. They wanted to make me Christian. Make me white. My mother traded 2 ponies to get me back. But I was never the same after. Mary Lou swallowed hard. They tried to change you. He nodded. Made me feel wrong. Like I didn't fit anywhere anymore. She shifted closer to the fire. I felt like that every day of my life. He looked at her, not with pity, but with recognition. I know. The rain kept falling, but the silence between them wasn't empty. It felt like something strong was growing inside it. The next morning, she helped him put up the final piece of the chimney pipe. Her hands weren't strong, but they were steady, and he guided her with calm patience. When it was done, she stepped back and stared at the cabin like she was seeing it for the first time. It's real, she said softly. It's yours, he replied. Down in the town, word had spread further than they knew. Jed had been drinking more heavily, sitting with men who liked to talk big when their bellies were full of beer and their heads were light. One of them was a man named Curtis Lane, who used to own land just past the river and had a mean streak for anything he didn't understand. He took it personally that a Comanche was building something better than most white men ever could. They're not just building a house, Curtis said one night at the saloon. They're laying claim to our land. Jed, red-faced and slurring, had slammed his mug down. He's got my sister twisted up. Probably already defiled her. That word made Curtis lean in close. You want to make this right? What are you thinking? Curtis smiled, slow and ugly. Something real American. Back at the hill, Mary Lou was hanging a curtain across the cabin window. It was just an old sheet, trimmed and dyed with crushed berries to give a hint of purple. Tocho stood nearby, watching her work, a faint trace of a smile on his lips. You think they'll let us be? She asked. He didn't answer at first. No, but we'll hold as long as we can. She nodded. Then we hold. He walked over and gently took her hand. His thumb brushed across the back of it, and she looked up, startled, not because it felt wrong, but because it didn't. I want to ask you something, he said. She waited. When the time comes, if it does, will you stand beside me? She didn't even blink. I already am. That night, they shared a meal on the porch. Dried meat, cornbread, a jar of wild greens she'd found along the creek. It wasn't much, but they ate it together, knees nearly touching, watching the sky turn from deep blue to black. No one spoke, but everything was said. The next morning, Tocho left early to hunt. He promised to return by dusk. Mary Lou stayed behind to sweep the floor and rearrange the small pile of books she'd slowly collected from town. The few the general store owner hadn't refused to sell her once rumors started flying. She was hanging a basket on the wall when she heard it. The sound of hooves, too many to count. Then shouting. Men. Voices she recognized. Curtis. Jed. Her heart raced. She rushed to the door and bolted it from the inside. She stood back, breathing fast, her hands shaking. You open that door, Mary Lou. Jed's voice boomed outside. Or we're coming in. Curtis shouted something about claiming land, defending town pride. She backed into the corner, her eyes wide, mouth dry. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She waited. They started pounding on the door. Then axes. But before they got through, another sound cut through the noise. A voice, low and steady. Tocho, you take one more step, he said, and you'll find out what happens when a man builds with purpose. There was silence, long, thick, then a shot. Mary Lou screamed. But when she threw the door open moments later, it wasn't Tocho on the ground. It was Jed doubled over, clutching his leg. Tocho stood above him, rifle raised, not shaking. The other men looked stunned. Then slowly, one by one, they backed away. No one wanted to be the one to face a man who didn't blink when a bullet flew. Curtis cursed and rode off first. The others followed. Tocho turned to her, breath heaving. His hands were clenched tight. I didn't mean, he aimed at the house. She ran to him. I know. He looked down at her, eyes dark, afraid. Not for himself, but for her. We've made our line now, he said. They won't let it go. She took his hand. Then neither will I. That night, they sat together by the hearth, the fire crackling low. The cabin smelled like with smoke and something new. Hope, maybe. Or defiance. Or love. Whatever it was, it belonged to them. And for now, that was enough. They didn't speak of the shooting for 2 days. Mary Lou watched the bruises rise on Tocho's arms where he'd wrestled the rifle away from Jed, watched the way his shoulders tensed whenever a branch cracked too loud or a shadow moved near the window. He didn't flinch, but he watched always now, as if waiting for something worse to follow. The cabin, once their shared peace, felt heavier. Mary Lou tried to pretend it hadn't changed. She swept the porch. She cooked what little food they had. She hung a dried flower garland above the hearth, tied with a bit of blue ribbon she'd saved since she was a child. She said things like we're safe now, and they're cowards. They won't come back, but deep down, she wasn't sure either. Something had cracked, not just in the men who rode up that day, but in her. She hadn't been able to move when the shouting started. Her whole body had frozen, rooted to the cabin floor like a tree in drought. And even when she found her voice, it had taken everything not to cry. That old fear, the one that came from years of being forgotten, unwanted, dismissed, it had slithered back in. She told herself she was strong now. But was she? And Tocho, too, was pulling away. Not out of anger, but out of quiet. He stopped speaking unless she asked something directly. He sat on the far end of the porch instead of beside her. He slept lighter, rising at every sound. She noticed the blade under his pillow. She noticed the way his eyes never settled for long anymore. On the third evening, after the sun slipped behind the hills, Mary Lou sat at the table twisting a piece of thread between her fingers while Tocho cleaned his rifle in silence. The only sound was the soft clink of metal, the hush of the wind slipping through the window. Finally, she spoke. You're not really here anymore. He didn't look up. I am. No, she said. Your body is. But your mind's back in that camp. With those men. With what could have happened. He set the rifle down slowly. I can't protect you if I'm not ready. She stared at him. Is that what I asked you for? Protection. He met her eyes, something raw in his expression. Isn't that what you need? No, she whispered. I need you. Just you. Not a soldier. Not a wall. Just a man who built this place with his own hands and sat with me when I couldn't sleep. Tocho pushed back his chair, rising. He moved to the door and opened it, looking out over the trees, his voice low. They will come again. And next time, it won't be a warning shot. She stepped up behind him. Then we faced them, together. His shoulders dropped. You don't understand, Mary. They're not afraid of me. Not deep down. They're afraid of what we mean. What we prove. That their hate doesn't decide everything. That a girl like you and a man like me could be something. She reached for him, but he stepped away. That scares them, he said, quieter now. And that fear turns fast. Mary Lou didn't speak. The truth of it burned deep. In the woodshed, in the Carter house, in the eyes of her stepmother, there'd always been something in the way she was looked at, something that said you don't belong. She just never realized until now that she could belong, that she should. And now, having touched it, the thought of losing it filled her with a deeper kind of dread than anything Jed or Curtis Lane could summon. Later that night, after Tocho had gone out to check the perimeter again, she found herself pacing the cabin. The fire had burned low. Her hands trembled without cause. And in her chest sat a terrible question she hadn't dared ask aloud. What if he leaves? What if the fear was too much, not of the men, not of the violence, but of feeling something this strong? What if she wasn't enough to make him stay? Her thoughts spiraled, pulling her back to the shed, to the way Laureen used to sneer, "You'll never be wanted." Not really. To the sound of her father's voice saying nothing when Laureen cursed her. To the look on Jed's face when he spat that word, defiled, like she was dirt someone had walked through. She sank to her knees beside the fire and wept, not for the danger, but for the part of herself that still believed them. The smallness inside her that had never gone away. When Tocho returned, he paused at the door, silent. She didn't turn. He knelt behind her, a hand hovering, then resting gently on her back. "I shouldn't have pulled away," he said softly. She wiped her eyes, but didn't move. "I know why you did." He didn't reply for a long time. The fire cracked once quietly. Then he spoke. "When I was taken, they gave me another name. Samuel. They made me cut my hair. Made me say prayers I didn't understand. I forgot my language for a while." She turned slowly. He looked at her, and there was grief in his face she hadn't seen before. "I don't tell people that. Not even the ones who ask. But you should know." "Why me?" "Because I see the same ache in your eyes. Like someone stole your name too. Maybe not out loud, but piece by piece." Mary Lou reached for him then, took his hand. "You give it back to me. Every day, you remind me I exist." He gripped her hand tightly. "So do you." They sat there in silence, side by side, neither speaking. And for the first time in days, they weren't waiting for something to go wrong. They were just there, together. But peace was brief. A letter arrived by Ryder the next day. Sheriff Tolman sent it, folded into an envelope with no return address. Mary Lou opened it on the porch. Her fingers shook as she read. The council's voting to challenge the land rights. They're claiming the structure was built on territory designated for community development. If the vote passes, the cabin must be removed, or Tocho faces removal. She handed the letter to him in silence. He read it once, didn't react. "What do we do?" she asked. He handed it back. "We stay, but I need to speak." "To the council?" "No, to the town." That night, Tocho rode into Rockside. Alone. Mary Lou waited in the cabin, pacing, lighting and relighting the lamp. The sky outside grew dark. The moon rose. But he didn't come back. She imagined everything that could go wrong. That he'd be arrested, shot, run out of town, or worse, silenced. When the door finally opened near dawn, she flew to him. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, his lip bruised, but his eyes were alive. "They listened," he said, breathless. "Some of them. Not all. But I made them look me in the eye." Mary Lou stared at him. "What did you say?" "That I built something with love. That if they tore it down, they weren't destroying wood, they were destroying proof. That their hate couldn't stop us from existing." She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist, holding on tightly. "I don't care what they vote. I'm not leaving." He pressed his forehead to hers. "Neither am I." But the fear didn't leave them. It just grew quiet, like a wolf circling beyond the edge of firelight. In the days that followed, Mary Lou began having nightmares again. Visions of the cabin burning, of Jed's face outside the window, of being dragged back to the Carter place and locked away. She didn't tell Tocho. He already carried too much. But one morning, When he found her curled up outside by the creek, shivering despite the sun, he sat beside her and pulled her into his arms. "You don't have to be strong every second," he whispered. "You've earned rest too." She wept into his shoulder. "What if this ends before it really begins?" He kissed her temple. "Then we make it last as long as we can. And we don't run." A week later, the council voted. The sheriff rode up again. Alone. No papers this time. "They tried," he said, "but there's no legal claim. The land's yours by boundary." "Barely. But it holds." Mary Lou blinked. "So they can't take it?" He shook his head. "They can hate. They can whisper. But they can't touch what you've built." She turned to Tocho, breathless. He didn't smile, but the weight in his eyes lifted. Later, when the sheriff was gone and the town grew quiet again, she leaned against the cabin wall and stared up at the sky. "It's ours," she whispered. And Tocho, from across the porch, simply said, "You're mine." But she didn't hear it as ownership. She heard it as belonging, for the first time in her life. Still, in her dreams, the flames sometimes came. But now so did Tocho, and that made all the difference. The air turned dry and tense as late summer rolled in. The days heavy with stillness and nights full of sounds that didn't feel natural. Twigs snapping too close, horses pacing just out of sight, a silence that waited. Mary Lou felt it in her chest before she ever saw it. Something unfinished was circling back. The cabin stood solid behind her now, real and rooted, but she could feel how fragile peace was, like a glass pane holding back a flood. She started dreaming of her father, not the man as he was, but the version her younger self still longed for, the one who looked at her like she was a gift, not a reminder of the woman he lost. In the dreams, he stood at the edge of the porch, said her name like it meant something, and then turned away before she could answer. She always woke with her mouth open, trying to speak to him and never managing a sound. One evening, Tocho came in from chopping wood with a look that stopped her breath cold. "Jed's been seen in the woods again," he said. "He's not alone this time." Mary Lou felt it then, the final chapter to everything they hadn't faced. The reckoning that had been building since the moment Tocho laid the first beam of her cabin. They made quiet preparations. Tocho dug a second trench line around the cabin, half hidden under loose brush. He moved the rifles closer to the window and rechecked every bolt, every shutter. Mary Lou didn't ask questions. She just watched his hands, always calm, always methodical, and reminded herself they'd made it this far together. But she was unraveling inside, not from fear of violence, but from what it would mean if Jed came back and succeeded in breaking this, if the last piece of her family tried to take from her the one place she had ever belonged. It would prove everything Lorene ever whispered into her ear, that she was too small to keep what mattered, that nothing she loved would ever stay hers. 3 days passed. Then, just after midnight, it happened. The first stone shattered the front window, landing hard against the floor. Tocho was up in seconds, rifle in hand. Mary Lou's body froze in place as shouts echoed from the tree-line. For men at least, maybe 5. She caught the rough edge of Jed's voice, sharp and loud. "Come out, you bastard. I'll burn that shack to the ground before I let you lay claim to her." Tocho didn't move toward the door. He stayed low, guiding Mary Lou toward the back wall. "Go into the bed," he said softly. "No," she said, breathless. "Not again. You're not hiding, Mary. You're surviving. That's different." She shook her head. "If you stay here and face them alone, it's the same thing all over again. Someone's stealing the life we try to make." Their eyes locked. Outside, footsteps circled. One man shouted something about lighting the kindling. Tocho pressed his forehead to hers. "Then stand with me." And they did. When Jed kicked the door open, expecting darkness and a frightened girl huddled in the corner, he found Mary Lou with a rifle in her hands, standing straight, her body trembling but unbroken. Tocho stood just behind her, his own weapon lowered but ready. Jed paused, thrown off. "Leave," she said. "You think I'm going to take orders from a half-wit and a squaw lover?" Mary Lou's voice shook. "No, I think you'll leave because you're a coward who only comes when he's sure someone else is afraid. Jed laughed, a bitter sound. You were always pathetic. You think this man cares about you? He's using you, same as anyone would. You're too small to keep anything. He'll leave you the second you stop being useful. She took a step forward past the doorframe. I'm not small, Jed. I'm just not afraid of being seen anymore. Behind him, one of the other men shifted nervously. A match flared, but no one lit anything. Tocho stepped beside her now, speaking calmly. You don't have to die out here. Turn back. Go home. Jed raised his rifle. Mary Lou didn't flinch. I buried Pa myself, she said, voice sharp. It didn't even come. You never look back. You don't get to act like this land or this life belongs to you now. I am this family, he yelled. You were, she said, until you left. And I was just the mistake you blamed. But I'm not yours to fix or break anymore. The wind shifted. A long silence fell. Then Jed pulled the trigger. The shot rang through the trees like a scream. Mary Lou's ears rang. She stumbled, but not from pain. Tocho had moved before the sound, knocked the rifle upward. The shot missed. He lunged, taking Jed down in seconds, pinning him to the dirt with a knee in his back, weapon discarded. The other men fled. It was over in less than a minute. Jed lay gasping, face in the mud, stunned more by her defiance than his defeat. He spat, but his fight was gone. Tocho stepped back, breathing hard. Mary Lou walked forward and looked down at the man who had haunted her for so long. You could have had a place here, she whispered, but you chose hate. He didn't respond. Later, the sheriff came. This time not with questions, just resolution. The men who ran were known. They'd faced charges. Jed was locked in the town jail without bail. No one defended him. Mary Lou stood in front of the shattered cabin window the next morning, the sun cutting through the broken glass. Tocho wrapped an arm around her. She leaned into him slowly. I was terrified, she admitted. I know, but not of him. Of me. Of who I'd have to be to stop him. He kissed her temple. You were more than enough. She turned in his arms and buried her face in his shoulder, letting the years of silence, smallness, and shame fall away. No one was watching. No one was waiting to take it from her. I thought I was cursed, she whispered, that I was always going to be someone else's mistake. You were never a mistake, he said. Just someone who hadn't been seen right yet. They cleaned up the cabin together, repaired the window, rehung the curtain. The house didn't look untouched, but that was fine. It didn't need to be perfect. It needed to be theirs. With marks, with memory, with proof that they'd survive what tried to undo them. That evening, they sat outside as the wind carried cooler air through the trees. Tocho handed her a small leather pouch. Inside was a carved stone, smooth, round, etched with the shape of a tree. It's from my mother's land, he said. We used to give them when someone was reborn. Mary Lou clutched it tightly. Why me? Because you lived through fire, and you didn't come out ashes. Her eyes brimmed. Neither did you. And in that moment, sitting side by side, no fire left to put out, no shadows left to chase, Mary Lou realized something she'd never dare believe. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And the girl who once slept in a woodshed had built a life no one could burn down. The first morning without fear tasted like quiet. Mary Lou woke before the sun, not because she was anxious or trying to beat the house to life, but because her body had learned peace takes time to trust. She lay still under the quilt, eyes tracing the beams overhead, listening to the soft rustle of Tocho's breathing beside her. The cabin didn't creak with tension anymore. The shadows at the windows didn't feel like threats. For once, the stillness meant calm, not danger. Tocho stirred when she sat up, his hand instinctively reaching for hers. No words were needed, just that warm, steady grip, like an anchor holding her to this moment. She looked at him and smiled. He smiled back, sleepy and real. They got up together and made breakfast with what little they had. Cornbread, a few wild onions, and fresh water from the creek. It was simple, but Mary Lou couldn't remember a meal that had felt more like home. The way he sat at the table, elbows resting wide like he'd always belonged there. The way she hummed without realizing it as she stirred the pot. It all felt right. Easy. Not perfect. Just theirs. Later, they walked the perimeter of the cabin, side by side. No need for rifles or warning signs. The trees that had once hidden enemies now just rustled softly in the wind. Tocho showed her how to tell deer prints from coyote. She knelt beside him, careful to place her palm over his in the dirt, mirroring the gesture. The touch lingered, slow and quiet, full of understanding. She'd asked him once what it felt like to belong. Now she didn't have to. By late afternoon, they rode into town together. It was the first time since the vote that they'd shown up as something more than rumor, as something undeniable. People looked. Some turned away. Others nodded. One old man outside the smithy tipped his hat with a half smile. The general storekeeper, who once refused to sell her fabric, now gave her a quiet, respectful glance before returning to his shelves. The world hadn't changed, but they had, and that made all the difference. Mary Lou picked out thread and fabric. She bought a second skillet and 2 new spoons with coins she'd saved in a tin behind the fireplace. When the shopkeeper rang her up, he didn't ask where she lived. He knew now. They walked back up the hill as the sun began to set, warm orange light sliding across the field. Tocho held the basket of supplies without speaking. His quiet wasn't distance anymore. It was comfort. It was knowing he didn't have to fill the space between them. When they reached the porch, Mary Lou paused. "I want to ask you something." Tocho set the basket down gently. "All right." She turned to face him, fingers laced in front of her. "If I stayed with you, not just now, not just till the town moves on, but always, would you let me?" His eyes softened. "You don't have to ask. I want to," she said, "because no one ever gave me the chance to choose before." He stepped close, brushed a hand against her cheek. "Then choose me." "I already did." The wind blew softly as he kissed her. Not rushed, not like something stolen, like something finally returned. That night, they lit a lantern in the window, not because they feared the dark, but because it looked beautiful from the inside. Mary Lou laid her head against his chest as they sat near the fire, his arms folded around her back. "You once told me someone stole your name," she whispered. "Have you ever thought about what you'd call yourself now?" He was quiet a long time. "Sometimes," he said, "but it's not the name they took. It's the right to use it freely." She lifted her head. "Then use it. With me." He looked into her eyes. "My name is Tocho." And she said it like a vow. "Tocho. No one could take it now." Later, when she curled into bed beside him, the moon high through the glass panes, she touched the carved stone he'd given her, the one from his mother's land. It was smooth under her fingers, warm from her pocket, a reminder that nothing was built without scars, but also that scars meant survival. Weeks passed. The cabin grew fuller, not crowded but filled. Mary Lou planted herbs just beyond the porch, mint, sage, and something called wild thyme Tocho taught her to dry and hang. He began teaching her his language in fragments, gently correcting her pronunciation with patient hands and soft laughter. She practiced in whispers while she kneaded bread. Sometimes she found him carving small wooden animals, birds, or flutes. He gave her one, a rabbit, delicate and round, and said it reminded him of the way she used to sit silent but alert, always ready to run. "But I didn't," she said. "No," he answered. "You stayed. That's braver." One morning, a woman came up the hill, Mrs. Ellery, who worked as a midwife and widow herself, carrying a folded blanket and a pie. She said nothing about the past, just handed Mary Lou the bundle and asked if she'd be interested in helping tend to a birth come winter. "It pays in goods," she said, "and I don't like to walk alone past sundown." Mary Lou nodded. "I'd like that." After the woman left, she stood on the porch holding the pie in her hands, staring out at the creek. She didn't ask anything. She didn't need to, Tocho said. She saw enough. They slept deeply those nights, not from exhaustion, but from finally having rest. Mary Lou no longer dreamed of the shed, or of Jed's voice, or of her mother's cold words. She dreamed of soil and sun, of hands dipped in water, of children's laughter she hadn't yet heard, but somehow believed would come. She asked Tocho once what he believed happened after death. He looked up at the sky and said, "I think we go to where the ones who loved us are waiting, and they know us right away." She smiled. "I used to hope I'd disappear. Now I hope someone remembers me." "I will," he said, "even if I'm first to go." She shook her head. "We'll walk out together in the end, like we walked in." On the first cold day of autumn, she strung the second curtain across the rear window and lit a fire in the hearth. The walls were patched with handprints, cooking smoke, and the stories they never had to say out loud anymore. Mary Lou sat on the floor, shelling beans while Tocho played a quiet tune on the carved wooden flute. The music wasn't sad. It wasn't joyful either. It was something in between, like gratitude spoken through breath. And as the fire crackled and the sky faded to dusk, the girl who was once cast aside for being too small leaned her shoulder against the man who had seen her fully and whispered, "We're home now." And they were.